When the Second World War ended in May 1945, the world celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany. The Nuremberg trials promised justice for the most notorious leaders of the Third Reich, but while the cameras focused on the courtroom, some of the worst offenders were already disappearing, not into the shadows of Europe, but across the ocean, to Argentina. They escaped through a network now known as the ratlines, and for years, many of them lived free, hidden in plain sight. Some were eventually caught, others took their secrets to the grave. This is how they got away, and how some were finally brought to justice. The story begins with chaos. Germany in 1945 was a shattered country. Cities in ruins, millions displaced, records destroyed. Amid that confusion, high-ranking Nazis forged new identities, blending in with civilians or posing as low-ranking soldiers. From there, many headed south, to Italy. In the ruins of post-war Rome, sympathetic clergy members, knowingly or not, helped them secure travel documents. The International Red Cross, overwhelmed by millions of refugees, issued thousands of passports with little verification. And with those papers, ships left the port of Genoa bound for South America. The destination? Buenos Aires, where President Juan Domingo Perón, sympathetic to fascism and eager for European talent, quietly welcomed them. One of the first to arrive was Adolf Eichmann, the man who organized the logistics of the Holocaust. At the end of the war, Eichmann vanished from sight, slipping into the American-occupied zone in Germany under a false name. When the Allies began actively hunting him, he moved constantly, avoiding capture by changing jobs, staying in rural villages, and relying on sympathizers. In 1950, he traveled to Italy, where a Franciscan friar helped him obtain an international Red Cross passport under the name Ricardo Clement. He boarded a ship to Argentina and began a new life as a factory worker for Mercedes-Benz. For nearly a decade, Eichmann lived quietly in a suburb of Buenos Aires, his neighbors unaware, or unwilling to believe, who he really was. His undoing came in 1960, when Israeli intelligence agents tracked him down after a tip from a German Jewish immigrant who recognized his son. The Mossad abducted Eichmann, smuggled him out of the country, and put him on trial in Jerusalem. It was one of the most famous captures in history, broadcast to the world. Another fugitive, Josef Mengele, was different. Known as the Angel of Death for his medical experiments on prisoners in Auschwitz, Mengele was both feared and infamous, but he managed to vanish almost completely. At war's end, he was briefly detained by the Americans, but under a false name and without the SS blood group tattoo many officers had, he was released. He returned to Bavaria, hid with his family, and in 1949 traveled to Genoa using another false identity. Like Eichmann, he sailed to Buenos Aires, but unlike Eichmann, Mengele lived more openly, registering under his real name for a time, and even obtaining legal residency. When Eichmann was captured, Mengele went underground, fearing he was next. He fled to Paraguay, then Brazil, living under assumed names, supported by a network of former Nazis and sympathizers. Despite repeated attempts by Nazi hunters and Mossad agents, Mengele was never caught. He drowned in 1979 after suffering a stroke while swimming off the Brazilian coast. Erich Priebke's story is yet another variation. An SS officer involved in the 1944 Argentine massacre in Italy, Priebke was captured by the Allies but escaped from a prison camp in 1946. Making his way to South Tyrol, he linked up with Catholic clergy who supplied him with false papers. In 1948, he sailed to Argentina with his family, settling in the resort town of Bariloche, a place that would become a haven for many fugitives. For decades, Priebke lived as a respected citizen, working as a school director. It wasn't until 1994, when an American television crew tracked him down and confronted him on camera, that the truth surfaced. Extradited to Italy, he was finally tried and convicted for his role in the massacre, nearly 50 years after the crime. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, had yet another route. As head of the Gestapo in Lyon, France, Barbie tortured and deported countless resistance members and Jews. After the war, the Americans recruited him as an intelligence asset, valuing his knowledge of communist networks. When his presence became politically inconvenient, US intelligence quietly helped him escape through the rat line. By 1951, Barbie was living in Bolivia, where he advised the military and continued intelligence work. It wasn't until the 1980s that he was extradited to France, tried and convicted of crimes against humanity. He died in prison in 1991. Not every fugitive lived a quiet life. Some used Argentina as a base to travel throughout South America, while others engaged in arms deals, espionage, or political advising. And the protection they received was not accidental. President Perón's government issued thousands of visas to Europeans in the late 1940s, many without proper background checks. German-speaking communities in Buenos Aires, Córdoba, and Bariloche provided instant cover and support. With sympathetic officials and wealthy Nazi networks financing them, fugitives could find homes, jobs, and even positions of influence. But capture was always a risk. Sometimes it came from international pressure, other times from sheer chance. Herbert Tukas, a Latvian collaborator nicknamed the Butcher of Riga, lived openly in Brazil and later Uruguay. In 1965, Israeli agents lured him to Uruguay under the pretense of a business deal, assassinating him to send a message. Even decades later, justice could still come. Walter Kuchman, a Gestapo officer responsible for massacres in Poland, lived quietly in Argentina until journalists exposed him in the 1970s. Although his extradition was requested, he died before facing trial. Some escaped entirely because the Cold War shifted priorities. Western intelligence agencies sometimes turned a blind eye, preferring to use former Nazis against the Soviet Union rather than hand them over for prosecution. In those years, South America became a convenient place to park such assets, far from European courts. By the time the truth about these escapes became widely known, many fugitives were old men. Some, like Eichmann and Barbie, faced trial and imprisonment. Others, like Mengele, slipped away forever. What is clear is that their escape routes were not improvised. They were organized, financed, and facilitated by sympathetic governments, corrupt officials, and even international organizations. Without this network, the story of Nazis in Argentina would have been one of failure and capture. Instead, for decades, it was a story of survival and of justice delayed. The ratlines are now a documented part of history. We know the names of the ships, we have copies of the forged passports, and we know that in some cases, entire fortunes looted from Europe helped pay for these escapes. But the most unsettling truth is this: many of these men did not evade justice because the world couldn't find them. They evaded justice because for a long time, the world didn't want to look. If you found this video educational or entertaining, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell.